Recently, chess has exploded in popularity, in part due to the Queen's Gambit, in part due to COVID. It's died down a little bit, but there are still so many people who could play chess, but just don't simply know how. So that's what this will be for. It'll teach you the basics of chess, and as well as an opening, and some ideas to kind of get you started. So, where do you play though? No one really has a board, or the few that do already kind of know how to play. So there's two really good websites online, one chess.com that I'm on right now, and one Lichess, that both are very, very good starting points and don't require you to pay money. You can just sign up for free, and instead of having to buy a board, you can just play online on your computer or your phone. So after that, now that we know where we can play, let's learn how the pieces move. You have this knight. The knight's the first piece that I will show. And if you see these dots, that's how all the pieces that I'm showing you, chess.com shows how they can move, basically. So, the knight moves in L shapes. It can move up 2 over 1, over 2, down 1, so on and so forth. It'll always do 2, 1, or 1, 2. And it is the only piece, actually, that is able to jump over pieces. So you can see here, it jumps over these pawns. It can be both your pawns and your opponent's pawns, and it can take in the same direction it moves. All pieces except pawns take in the same direction that they typically would move. Then you have bishops. Bishops move as far as they want in the diagonal. You can be as little as one space, or you can do all the way to the edge of the board. They just cannot go through pieces. And you also have a difference between light and dark squared bishops. Because of how they move, you can see this bishop is stuck on light squares, so if you had one on dark squares, it would also be stuck on dark squares. Now, rooks are like bishops, except instead of diagonally, they move in straights, which means either horizontally or vertically. They can move as far as they want or as little as they want. You have then a queen, which a queen is basically, I would describe as just a bishop and a rook slammed together into one thing. Because, again, it can move as far or as little as it wants diagonally, or it can move horizontally, like a rook or like a bishop. Then you have the king. The king is actually the easiest piece to understand, and because checkmating it or making it so it cannot move at all is the goal of the game, it has the most basic moves. So it can move entirely one square in any direction, diagonally or just straight. Now you have pawns. Pawns are actually, surprisingly, the most complicated piece to understand how they move. Typically, they will just move up one square. But if they start on the beginning squares, they're able to move up 2 or up 1. Now you can see this one can move 2, this one can move either 2 or 1, as long as they're on the starting square. Now after that, they can only move up 1, and that's it. But, like I said earlier, they cannot capture forward. So this pawn cannot capture this pawn here, but actually they capture diagonally, which means this pawn could take this way and this could take diagonally here. While these two pawns are stuck, and if I hold this pawn, you can see that I can move forward, but this pawn can't take forward. And then there's also another rule where if a pawn moves 2 forward, this is called en passant, you can look it up, it's actually very fascinating. If it moves 2 from the starting square, for the turn it moves, and that turn only, you can actually capture it diagonally. So now, here's a very basic opening idea to get you started. So first you play the pawn in front of the queen, your opponent will typically play this. If they don't, you just play this move anyway, which is the pawn in front of the bishop. Now this is called the Queen's Gambit. And now I will show you the Queen's Gambit declined. If they actually take this piece, it is completely free. You should go e4, and after you do that, you will open the bishop here. So they'll take, you'll open the bishop, and they will typically try to defend this pawn. So in this line, you want to play moves that always will attack and undermine these two pawns. That's the idea. You can look more into it on YouTube. There are a bunch of great videos on that, but for now, this move here will show you most of the opening ideas, which are 1, to develop your minor pieces, 2, to take the center, which we've already done very well with these two pawns here, attacking the center very well and giving a lot of space, and then 3, to castle your king, which is a rule where you can move your king and rook as long as there are no pieces in the way. So I will show you that in a second. So first you'll start with just developing your knight. You could do either one. Knights before bishops typically, because they have a lot more moves. Your opponent will typically develop your knight. And a typical opening could look something like this, where you develop the bishops, and at this point you don't really have much to do, so your opponent will castle. But now you need to continue to develop your minor pieces in castle, so you want to open your bishop. This is a common idea. they'll continue to develop, and you might get something like this. Again, all the basic principles are here. Pieces are developed and off their original squares. You have a strong center here and more space than your opponent, and you're castled and both your kings are safe.